Got it. So thank you for so much for having me. Em and Birdie, this is very exciting to be here. And congratulations to all of you guys for getting into the program. Hotbed is absolutely fantastic. We were in one of the programs and it's been really helpful to be a part of this. So congratulations on being there. Like I mentioned and Birdie mentioned, my name is Faraan. I'm the founder and CEO at Saarey. Um, I grew up listening to South Asian classical music in a family that has been patrons of it for 64 years. And I truly believe that this is incredible music, and the world deserves to have access to this incredible part of world culture and heritage. A few years ago, I couldn't find good quality content online, and I was very surprised. And it turned out there were 125 million people around the world out of 1.6 billion South Asians who love this genre of music, but just don't have easy access to it. And it's a rapidly growing market where just on Spotify alone, this genre has grown 500% in the past 2 years. The Indian market itself is growing rapidly, is now the fifth largest economy in the world, is on track, according to Goldman Sachs, to be the second largest in a couple of years. And the music industry is going to be doubling its revenues by 2030. So at Saarey, we are building the digital ecosystem for South Asian classical music, where we provide easy access to exclusive content that you can't find anywhere else, and it's designed for the nuances of the genre. We already have an audio streaming service that is live worldwide on iOS, Android, and on the web. Now, we have secured exclusive rights to 85 to 90% of all recordings for the genre that are coming from Pakistan. And since our pre-seed round, we grew 70x to over 500,000 unique monthly active users. And by the end of this year, we should be crossing 1 million unique monthly active users. Now, I have 17 years of experience working in this industry. I'm a global MBA with honors from Columbia Business School, London Business School, and Hong Kong University. Both of my amazing co-founders come from London Business School. One was a Sloan, and he's a serial entrepreneur, and the other was the subscription manager at Spotify. We've now built an incredible team of 15 people who are doing phenomenal work spread globally. And we, in the past few years, have won a few awards, including winning at the Hotbed Accelerator last year. We were also selected as we won first prize at the Columbia Venture Competition in New York. We were selected as a Createch Ones to Watch by the UK Creative Industries Council. And a few weeks ago, Forbes India has named us one of the top 200 global companies in the world. And now we're here, and we're very excited to now be in the process of preparing for our Series A, and very happy to share our story and our early days with you. So thank you for having me.
We're going to talk more about the early days of fundraising. But firstly, I just wanted to say to everybody in the room, we're going to be talking about narrative and storytelling, and also we're going to be talking about traction dipping over the next few days. But that was a really great example of someone that's telling a story and using traction as part of that story to build a narrative that investors are like, whoa, okay, I want to get involved in this. I'm sure everybody noticed that. And I'm sure, Faraan, you've developed your narrative and figured out a way to tell the story in a way that makes investors listen through your experience of pitching hundreds of investors across your previous few rounds. And building a consumer business isn't necessarily the sexiest business model from an investor's perspective. They love B2B SaaS. So can you just talk us through your first initial fundraise? So did you go for friends and family, or did you approach angels cold? What was the makeup of your first initial round? And then how did you go about closing it?
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's incredibly difficult to raise your first round of funding. Getting your first money into the bank is very, very challenging. And I'm sure you've heard this hundreds of times. You'll continue to hear it throughout your journey. one of the most challenging things you do, and the most important thing for you to do, is have complete conviction in what you're doing. Now, in we raised about £230,000 in our first round. And we weren't lucky enough to have friends and family who had enough money to be able to fund what we were doing. So we went out to angels. And we initially went to people like and the advice that you generally get is to go with warm intros, to go to people you know. And that's correct because the probability of conversion is higher. But the challenge with that is that pool becomes very small. So we actually reached out to cold to a lot of people. And over our investment lifetime, 70% of the funds we raised so far has come from cold outreach. And out of the rest of the 30%, about 50% of those funds have come from warm introductions from those initial cold outreaches. So if you have actually look at the tree there, about 84% of the funds we've raised have come primarily from cold outreach. So I would highly recommend that. And these have come from purely angel investors. The last round, we had a VC who's come in with a small check, but primarily angel investors.
That's pretty insane that 70% came from cold outreach. What were your best strategies for finding and reaching out to the investors?
Oh, wow. So I wouldn't say there's one correct strategy to go about this, at least from our experience. Every investor, as again, you've probably heard and you will continue to hear, is different. They have their own nuances. So some people would like to be reached out on LinkedIn. Some people would like to be reached out via email. And they're always approach fundraising as potential funnels, where you want to reach out to people in your sector. You want to reach out to people who invest in your geography. That's very important. And then the stage, so these are the kind of two most important things. And then you have different stages. Some people are very comfortable investing early stage, and that'll be one funnel. And then there'll be people who will be happy investing later on. And when I say early stage, they can be people, some people will be very happy to just invest in you with the idea. Some people want to see a product. Some people want to see customer traction. Some people want to see more traction, say, 10,000 users, 100,000 users, a million users. Everyone is at a different stage as where they're comfortable taking that risk. And so as early stage founders, as somebody who's just started, I would recommend getting in touch with people today and say, hey, this is what we're building. Would this be of interest to you? And if they are, put them on your newsletter. And so that initial cold outreach via email or via LinkedIn is great, but you probably won't get conversion on day one. What will happen is you should start building up a mailing list where you want to then send out an email every single month of whatever progress that's happening. And that is extremely important because what you're essentially building over time is trust. Regardless of what pedigree you come from, what school you come from, whether they know you already or don't, the most important thing for you to do over time is build trust in your ability to deliver on what you're building. And that only comes over time. And that trust is through consistent behavior over time. And there's no way around it. So even the first people who invested, I was in touch with for at least 6 months before they did. Mm-hmm. And then subsequently, when I continued to send out those updates on how Saarey is doing, even people who hadn't even responded to my cold initial emails, I put them on the mailing list. And a year and a half down, people just said, hey, I love what you're doing. We've been following you for a while and we'd like to invest. So those are the kind of key things I would recommend you put in place. Now, get in touch with them, even if you're too early for them. And if they say you're too early, that's perfectly fine. Say, would you like, I'd love to put you on our news mailing list for our monthly newsletter. And then make sure you send out those new newsletters every single month.
We receive Farhaan's monthly newsletter, and it is very impressive. Not only because it's consistent, which it is, but the actual format and what you're showing in the update is not only kind of impressive growth, but I think it's just delivered in the right way, like in a digestible way, so you can read it quickly and then you get a feel for how the business is doing quite quickly. So for anyone that hasn't done that email template before, what do you put in yours, and do you use any specific software, or do you just compose it in an email?
So it took a while to kind of get to the point where it is today, and thank you for the kind words about what you think about the email and the format. So I always start with a executive summary on top, which is only the real key points for people who just want to read that. And then I always have my thank yous. So one summary of what's happened in the last month, and then a short intro to Saarey, again, for people who might have not have seen it before or just need a refresher on the top bullet points for Saarey itself. And then I get into thank yous. So whether you send it on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, there will be lots of people who would have helped you, given you advice, who you would have connected with. And I'm sure you've heard this lots of times. Things are never built in silos. They're always built with other people who have helped you in some way, shape, or form, whether in a small way, whether in a big way. And gratitude is immensely important for yourself and your mental well-being, as well as publicly acknowledging that, I appreciate you and thank you for helping in whatever way you could. And so I've been very lucky, and Saarey has been extremely lucky to have some incredible people willing to give advice to us throughout our journey, and they continue to do so. And so we make sure we acknowledge that. So summary of progress about the company, and then the thank yous. And then you can put other key events that might have happened, KPIs on if you have numbers already in metrics and how that's going. Then I speak about the team. If there's any new person who's joined the team, who they are. If you're looking for somebody, for example, if you're looking for a CTO, if you're looking for a CMO, put that in. And then asks. And I have actually two sections for asks. I have asks after the thank yous, specifically for fundraising, or specifically for the thing that we would like the most immediate help in. And then at the bottom, I have more generic, longer term asks. For example, we want to get into AI eventually. We have that there. We want to build out a metadata. We have that there. And I am every single month so surprised as to how diligently people read these. And people who have never responded will all of us out of the blue just send an email saying, oh, I know this guy, I'll connect you to him. Oh, are you still looking for help here? Why don't you try this? And it's always amazing to see that.
That's really helpful. One of the things too I like about your newsletter is like in the thank you section, from the investor point of view, for the person reading it, it's helpful to see like what type of conversations you're having, and you can kind of get a gauge on where the founder's focus is or where they're looking for support. So it's useful in that way too. Going back to what you said earlier about the cold outreach, I think like a really important takeaway from that is that you're not going out to the investor with the ask of, hey, can we have a meeting to talk about my pre-seed round? It's like, hey, I'm building this. Can I just add you to the newsletter? That's probably a lot easier to get a yes from or a response from, as opposed to like, meeting or deck review. But can you talk about what that message, what did you put in that message? How long was it? How detailed did you get? And then also, how far along were you at during both the point that you reached out at and also your first race? So a lot of questions for you. Sorry.
Thank you. I hope I can cover all of those. So now when I do my outreach, all I say is, for example, on LinkedIn, my standard message is, hi, I love what you're doing at Hotbed. So make it very personal and make sure you've done your research on the person you're reaching out to. And then we're building the digital ecosystem for South Asian classical music. And I'd love your advice. And I genuinely reach out to people for their advice because I now know that at the first outreach will always be advice. It'll never convert, or at least in my experience, it has never converted from the first contact at an investment. And so it's important to establish that relationship, meet them on Zoom, meet them over a coffee, and then keep in touch via that newsletter. In terms of our first raise, so like I said, one of the first people who invested was my old professor who taught me global entrepreneurship. And he said, hey, I think what you're doing is great. I'll put in 10K. And then one person who I met during a round of interviews for Techstars Music, he said, even if Techstars doesn't take you in to the accelerator, I will still invest. And he's one of the founding members for Techstars Music. And then there was another person who I had met a couple of years ago when there wasn't even a company. And he decided to invest. And so then, over time, as those relationships were established and that, over time they continue to see progress, people stepped up and said, we'd love to invest.
That's super helpful. I've seen a few questions about the newsletter. Just a reminder, guys, there's a section in the newsletter, there's a section on newsletters in the startup guide that we passed out last night, I think. And if we have more time, we'll dive into that. But I don't want to spend too much time on it, otherwise we won't cover the other stuff. But if we have time, we can circle back in the Q&As. So Faraan, talk to us a bit around the investor feedback that I know we had questions about this, and I'm sure that you've got before, like how large is this market size? Are you going after a market that's too niche? And also the sort of initial assumption that people have, well, isn't this music available on Spotify? So how did you overcome those questions?
Great questions. Absolutely. So yes, so when you reach out to investors, they will be asking lots of questions. And a lot of times you won't have the answers to those questions, and that's perfectly fine. We didn't have the answers to a lot of those questions when we started off in the beginning. And when you're calculating market size, make sure you have reliable sources to back up that sizing. And different people will size it differently. But over time, as you continue to say, this is the market size, and this is why we think it is this, you will then see that people become more comfortable with your explanation, and then you'll know, all right, I'm calculating it the right way, and this is the right size. Now, whether it's too big or too small, it all depends on the investor that you're talking to. Some people will be very happy with a $100 million market size. They say, hey, I'd still like to invest. Some people are looking for $1 trillion market. So again, it comes back to that funnel. Different people have different appetites. And you want to find people with the appetite that fits your specific business and then build that relationship with them. And on the Spotify thing, yes, we got that a lot of times. In the beginning, we had no idea how to answer that. But then over time, we realized after, again, speaking to a lot of people giving their advice, and of course, discussing, the team having their input in it, that we realized that the content we have is not available anywhere else because we have those exclusive rights. And in the beginning, I never even spoke about exclusive rights. It was only about, this is what we're doing. And, Saarey is building the music streaming service for South Asian classical music, and then went to everything else. And then in the conversations that I had with advisors and investors, they said, oh, you should be talking about the exclusive rights that you have. Oh, why don't you have this? And so we started to put that in. And then I think it took us at least a year and a half to get to the point where the no's started to become really a lot less. It was like, this is missing and that is missing. You haven't spoken about this, you should put that in. And once we started kind of refining it, we had an initial skeleton. And it took us a year and a half. I'm sure it'll take you, for you guys, it'll be much faster because you have and Birdie to guide you guys. It'll be much faster for you to do. But you will get a sense that now your pitch deck is, or in your story, is at a point where it starts to resonate with investors and people. And that's where you want to get to.
But going back to you said like a lot of your investors were people from the industry, which I guess helps somewhat with the market sizing, because if they understand the industry that you're in, when you're giving them numbers about the addressable market, it will kind of make sense to them because you're not having to educate them as much about the market that you're operating in. Do you have anyone, somebody was asking actually on the chat, how did you find people that were in your industry? Because a lot of times when people are searching on LinkedIn, they'll be angel investors, but they won't write that they're an angel investor on their LinkedIn profile because they don't want to get flooded with inbound, or they might be interested in investing, but they wouldn't consider themselves an angel investor, but this is just a good opportunity for them. So did you have any of those conversations? How did you kind of target specific industry people and get them engaged?
Thank you for asking. So on the market sizing, I would say when you speak to people in the industry, that's also a sounding board. So you say, this is a £9 billion industry. And if people in the industry, are said, yeah, that makes sense, then you're on the right track. But if people in the industry are saying, no, it isn't, this is why, and we got that a lot in the beginning, then you're making a mistake somewhere, and ask them for advice. I asked them, how can I improve this? How would it make more sense? And then when you go to people who are not in the industry, for example, my professor was not in the industry. That person that I'd met a couple of years ago when there wasn't even a company, he wasn't a part of the music industry. But then it starts to make sense to them as well because you have something to back it up. On the cold outreach, the best would be to be able to LinkedIn. It has been very good for us. And so search for people who have angel investors in their titles or in their descriptions. Those are the people who want to be contacted. You don't necessarily want to contact people who don't want to be contacted cold. And so if they don't have it there, I'd say, don't, it'll be a waste of your time and theirs for you to do that.
Okay. Faraan, can you, oh, sorry, Purdy, were you gonna?
I was just going to ask, just to follow up on that point, how many on your cap table, what's the breakdown of kind of industry people versus non-industry people?
Oh, I can get back to you on that. I would say, 20 to 30% are music industry. And then another 50% would be consumers. And then we have about 20, 30% who are completely unrelated, who just love what we're doing and they invest it.
Right. Faraan, how much did you raise in your pre-seed round and your seed round? And then in the seed round, where were you at in terms of like users and revenue?
Oh, thank you for asking. So we raised £230,000 in our pre-seed round. We have not raised a seed round. We did a bridge round of 200 and I think it was 280,000 pounds. And at that point in time, we had raised, our track in terms of numbers, we had crossed 500,000 users. And we had now a team, we had a product that clearly showed that it was resonating. We had proven out. So when we raised our pre-seed, we had a product, but we had close to 7,000 users. And we went to the investors and said, listen, we know it's a huge market, and this is why. We would like your help to prove out that our business, so what we're building resonates with our users. And so to take that 7,000 users, and we said we'd get to 100,000 users. Because it is such an underserved industry, an underserved market. With the small amount that we raised in the pre-seed, we were able to get to 500,000 users really faster than we had anticipated. And so with that, we proved not only is the market big, it is significantly underserved because of the traction we got so fast. And then in that 1 year, we grew 70x to 500,000 unique monthly active users. And so when we did our bridge round, essentially we said, we have now proved out the fact that we have the market's big, we have a product that resonates with them, we know how to reach them. And so now as we are preparing for our Series A, we don't even have £10,000 in annual recurring revenues at this time. We focused on users. So we're different from most businesses in terms of at least UK businesses who focus on revenue from the beginning. We're slightly more towards the US model, where you grow your users to a point where you have enough data on those users, and then you turn on the monetization mechanism to grow your revenues. And so now we're at the point where we're saying, all right, we have these users, we know what's working, and now we want to turn on monetization. And that's what we're going to be doing for our Series A.
Great. Follow-up question on that, but first, Pody put in the chat that we're going to move to Q&A soon. So I see some of you guys already have your hands raised. Awesome. There's been so many questions coming in the chat. Also, I've seen a lot of questions like, what does X, Y, and Z mean? Love to see those questions. This is the week to ask all questions on what specific terms mean and how it applies to your startup. So keep those questions coming. Faraan, in regards to turning on the revenue, how do you respond to the pushback around like, okay, well, we see the user growth works and is thriving and your user acquisition strategy is clearly working, but how do we know those users are going to convert to paid users?
Yeah, very good question. And again, it comes down to people's appetite for risk. Some people will be all right with whatever answer we give them because they've seen some traction already. Some people will say we'll only invest when we actually see revenues growing, and that's perfectly fine. But my answer to that is, we know the amount that we're raising. We're going to invest X amount into marketing. We already know from our marketing that we have a fixed cost per install. So that will get us an X number of users. We know the industry benchmark from install to paid conversion is X%. And that gives us a certain number of paid users. We already know from our platform already that this is the amount of money that people are paying every single year on Saarey Music. And therefore, those number of paid users with that ARPU will get us this amount in revenues in X amount of time. And so we've done the math. We have all of that information there for investors to see. And we've already received some funding before we've even opened the next round yet.
I think that's a really key takeaway, what you touched on at the start, which is not every investor is going to have the right risk appetite or is going to see things the way that you do. And that's like part of it is really just a numbers game because everyone has their own specific, what they need to see in order to invest. So sometimes you just take the L and move on and spend your attention with other investors rather than just trying to convince the same ones. Okay, so we're going to move to Q&A. I'll start with a question from Nazia in the chat, and then Daniel, I'll go over to you next. So we touched on this a little bit, but she's asking, would you say that you're contacting investors, or sorry, no, I think it's phrased weird. What would you say when you're contacting investors, and like, would you highlight common ground? I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but like, how specific do you make those initial outreach messages?
Thank you for asking. So for me, it's very short and very specific. You want to say something that's personalized. And what I always say is, I only reach out to people who I think are doing something really impressive. And I say, I love what you do at, for example, Hotbed. So they know that it's not just a random shot in the dark. And then I say a short, just a one-liner about what we're doing. And I said, love to connect and get your advice. That's what we're doing. That's what I do. But one thing I didn't mention, but I'm sure if you haven't already heard it, you will hear it. Be prepared for a lot of no's. Be prepared to be really ghosted all the time. And you should have really thick skin to be able to handle that. I would say, I've reached out to hundreds, if not thousands of people. Maybe less than 1%, maybe less than 0.5% respond. And so be prepared for that.
Really useful and true. All right, Daniel, you are up.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Purdy and Em, for this second day. Faraan, thank you for the very insightful overview of your story. I have 3 questions in one. I'm co-founder of Royware. It's a London-based clothing company doing one thing very well around better travel. I think like you do one thing very well. So my questions are, can you talk a bit about your first iteration of Saarey that I think it started in Dubai? And then secondly, you mentioned a Spotify person as part of your team. And when you were looking for investment, how important was that? And secondly, how do you hire well if you have limited funds?
Thank you for those great questions, Daniel. Really, really good questions. Thank you for looking at my LinkedIn profile. The initial iteration so let me take a step back before even what happened in Dubai. So during my MBA, it was, for me, I was exploring what I wanted to do with my life. And so I had a number of different ideas and a number of different career options that I could potentially pursue. And doing something with South Asian classical music was just one of many ideas. But every single conversation that I was having with people, it all seemed to gravitate towards the fact that I had the 64 years of family background in South Asian classical music. I had relationships with artists that nobody else had. And was building and had some already business acumen that nobody else had. And so the intersection of these things was very rare. And so I decided to pursue that. And then till quite a long time, all I knew was I want to do something with this. It was just a blob. And I met a guest speaker at one of the courses that I was doing. And I said, this is what I'm doing. I'd love to get your advice as to what we could do. He said, sure. And so we had one conversation, and then we had another. And then we had a third one where at London Business School's Radcliffe Centre in the lower ground floor, there's a blue sofa with multicolored dots. And we sat there, opened a laptop, and we punched in some numbers. And he's the one who said, listen, this is a huge market. We have exclusive content. We should have our own streaming service. And that's how essentially that was born essentially it was Devon's idea. Devon is the name of my first co-founder. He's the one who came up with the idea. I didn't. And so that's how the streaming service was born. And so once the streaming service was born, the next step was, what do we do? How do we build it? And so I reached out to my networks, and I found somebody who was willing to be a mentor and had worked at Spotify. So I said, okay, that makes sense. And I reached out to him. Initially, he was a mentor for about 6 months. And then he was giving such incredible advice that I said, listen, I'd love to have you as a part of the team. Our initial product that we built was absolutely terrible. Yeah, we said, all right, we're going to go low cost. There was an online website who somebody recommended that all you have to do is upload your content, and they already have a streaming service available. And that's all you have to do, upload the content, and everything else would be ready. It was absolutely terrible. And we had to live with that for 6 months before we actually built our own in-house. And having Nick, and so Devin and Nick were part of the team, not because we wanted to raise funding. That wasn't the objective. It was because we wanted to build a great product that solves the problem for our users. And so when we eventually got to the point where we wanted to raise funding, that automatically helped, that we had the right people doing the right things for Saarey Music. I hope that answers all of your questions.
Great. I'm going to just take a question in the chat and add my own question to it, and then we'll go to Matt. So Matt, it will be a minute or so. So Rajesh in the chat asked, with your seed funding, can you please share the breakdown of your spending? So how much you spent on paid marketing, organic, product development, tech team, that kind of thing. And then my question on top of that, when we talk about what to put in the ask slide of your pitch deck, there will often be a breakdown of the spending, like Rajesh is asking about, but also you should be looking at what you're going to achieve with that money that you're getting from the investor. So my question is, what did you say you were going to achieve with that first round of funding, and did you achieve it?
Thank you for asking. So great question, Rajesh. Thank you for that question. We split our pre-seed spending with 50% to marketing, or I think it was 40% to marketing, and then 30% to content and operations and 30% on tech. That's how we'd split it. And I don't think you can really spend on organic marketing. I think it just goes to paid marketing. Unless you're building over time, you're building your SEO and you're building your ESO, and then you can potentially put that in that bucket. In terms of asks, yes, it's extremely important to say, all right, so for example, for our current pre-series A round that we're going to be opening soon, we're raising £5 million, and 50% of those funds will go to marketing, 30% to content and operations, and 20% will go to tech. And with that 50% invested in marketing, we will get to 23 million users and £9.5 million in annual recurring revenues. And we have that broken down, like I mentioned, with a cost per install, with the conversion to paid, with the ARPU that we have on the platform, of how that translates into those specific numbers. And when we did our first round, I briefly mentioned, we had said, all right, we're at 7,000 users. With the funding that we've raised, we'll get to 100,000 users. We got to 500,000. We were benchmarking that with the industry's cost per install. But because this is such an underserved market, our cost per install was half that of the industry benchmark. And our organic also grew, not significantly. Only 20% of people who come onto the platform are via organic word of mouth. The rest of the 80% are paid. But we really grew really fast. Thank you for that. So thank you for those questions.
So Matt, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. It's been really useful, and all the other questions have been great. So it's been really useful too. I just had a question about the very beginnings, how you went about valuing your business at that pre-seed stage. It's definitely a problem we've been having. It's just working out, how you value that business when maybe you got a little bit of traction or no traction. I'd love to kind of see if that's a conversation you're having with investors at the very early stages and how you kind of went about that.
So I think we made a mistake in actually saying what the value is. Thank you for that question. Very good question. I think we initially said we're going to value at 5 million. didn't get any traction from investors. It's only when we stepped back and said, we're going to leave it to the market to decide. What do you think the value for the company should be? And the more conversations we started to have, the more we started to realize, oh, this is where it should be. We raised at a £3 million valuation, finally. But I think we lost a lot of investors because we were saying what the valuation should be without really knowing what the market is valuing us at. It would help that if you look at all the benchmarks that are available, I'm sure you will have a session with Seed Legals who use that platform. I cannot recommend it enough. It's really, really good. They have lots of benchmarks for the UK, UK startup ecosystem. And then there are benchmarks available for the US ecosystem. I believe Carta is one of the places that you can find that information, otherwise generally available online. So look them up and see where kind of it should be, so that you don't want to be offered a valuation and accept a valuation that is too low, but you also don't want to be going too high, because otherwise you lose investors, and we made that mistake.
That's a really good piece of advice. Definitely, yeah, do not put your valuations on the deck. That's a big no-no that we see a lot, for the exact reasons that you said. The next question in the chat, I was going to take from Andre, and I'm pretty sure I'm messing up your name, so please correct me. And I see that your hand is raised, so do you want to come on and ask the question live, and please tell me how to correctly pronounce your name?
Just call me Andrew. That would be easier. No, let's not waste time. My question is about differences between B2B and B2C. So your business is B2C, right? I feel like when I'm reading various advice on the internet, I feel like it's focusing on how people raise for B2B, and it's like lots of for SaaS businesses, lots of meetups and things, or like they say, oh, we're all interested in tech, deep tech, stuff like that. So how much of the advice out there you found useful? How much of it is discarded? Do you think there are differences, or maybe just in my mind and it's really no different?
Thank you for asking. It's a great question. There are certainly differences. So B2C company would need to show a different amount of traction to get an X valuation. And a B2B company would need to show a different amount of traction to get the same valuation. And people do measure it differently. They want to see different things for B2C versus B2B. Also, people will, this exact same traction for the exact same sector, for exact same company, for example, in the Middle East, will be valued very differently to a company in the UK, will be valued very differently from a company in the US. And so it's good to have those benchmarks to know, but it'll be very industry specific, geography specific to what valuations you get, and sector specific. So one of the parts of the sector is not just being in the music industry, but also whether it's B2C or B2B. So thank you for that question.
Wonderful. Okay, Ramiro, you're up next.
Hi, good morning. Faraan, thank you very much for your valuable insights and for sharing your experience. Purdy and Em, thank you very much for hosting. And by the way, for the startup book that you shared yesterday, really valuable also. Thanks for that. And just to give you some context, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Added Me. We're a mobile app for personal development. It's B2C. Although we're addressing a market where there's a lot of comparables, we're pretty unique in the sense that we have a personal fulfillment rather than just success approach to life coaching, and we're delivering very hyper personalized insights with the help of AI, and we have an in-app community. But with this said, from a user perspective, it's not easy to highlight these unique features. So we have to say it's rather there's a lot of comparable offers out there. So I'm not sure if it's comparable to you, but my question is around user acquisition, which is we're launching the MVP in a couple of weeks. So that's what's on my desk right now. And Just like
Congratulations on
to,
getting there. It's a big milestone.
yeah, thank you very much. And I know we're really excited. Not to say nervous, but yes, excited. Let's just put it like that way. And around user acquisition. So how was your experience? How did you guys do it? Was it just word of mouth? Was it just paid, organic? How did you do that?
Great question. I'm trying to think what we did right in the beginning. So we were lucky enough to, because of my family background and because of my association with this industry, we were lucky enough to have a mailing list of just 500 people who we just initially reached out to. But then we quickly realized that the market is much bigger and the people we have in our mailing list is much smaller. And so then we started testing. We tested on, we said, all right, how can we reach users? Search for that, spoke to people. We got the regular responses of, have a Facebook page, have an Instagram page, TikTok, more recently, social influencers talking about it. That all of that really didn't work for us. But what we learned over time, what did work for us is meta ads enabled traffic and conversion campaigns. So it took us really some time to get there, as well as Google ads. And so you register your company, have build your ads platform where then you put up your content to be able to share with very specific users. And we found Facebook ads is what's really worked for us. But it took a long time for us to get there. It wasn't an overnight kind of thing. All right, this is what works. We had to do a lot of testing, get a lot of advice from a lot of great people until we found what worked for our use case. That's what I'd recommend to you as well. Start testing the regular things, and be very conscious about analyzing what really works for your use case, because it'll be different for everybody.
Great. Okay, Katrina, you're up.
Yes, hi there. Thank you very much for your presentation, and congratulations on what you're doing. So I'm Katrina Prentice, and I'm co-founder of Zac Health, which is AI telemedicine, and I'm just about to launch on Africa's largest telco platform, opening me up to 65 million subscribers. It's quite attractive to talent, and they get a bit greedy. So you mentioned Spotify. You got this guy from Spotify, which is great. And you said join the team. What does that mean? So for somebody like myself, we're pre-revenue. We're just about to go live in January. I've got work to be done. I don't have any money to pay anybody to do any work. What do you offer these potentially high influential rollers who could be a great asset to a business that I wouldn't necessarily need that high roller in days to come? It's probably now, but it would be good, I guess. I don't know, rambling a bit there. So how do you attract talent, and what do you offer them? Because when people see the business, they're like, right, I want 15% of your business. I can't do that with talent. So how do you get them in to work, either on a pro bono basis to begin with, and then what do you offer them? Profit share? We'll probably cover that this week, but I just need a little bit of better understanding.
Katrina, thank you for asking. Congratulations on getting the partnership with the African telco. Opening up yourself up to 65 million users is amazing. On talent, I have never found anyone to be greedy.
Right.
Maybe that's just me. But what I have found is everybody has different motivations.
Yeah.
And so you want to try and find people who fit where you are, with, you're able to match up their motivations with what you can offer. And so I was very lucky where our initial co-founders, weren't looking for any monetary compensation or any cash payout. They were only looking to do something really important in a really exciting space. And so we gave them equity. So ask them what they're looking for. If they're looking purely to be paid, then, and if you don't have the cash to pay them, then say, you know, we'd love to keep in touch to when you get to that point and you are able to pay them if you still need them at that point in time. But if you're willing to give up equity, just share whatever amount of equity you're willing to give up. Say, you know, if you're willing to give up 5%, if you're not willing to give up 15, give up 5% or give up 2% if you are willing to give up equity, but always vest that equity over time. Do not give equity upfront. So you give them 2%, for example, 5% equity. And again, that's a negotiation that you would have to have with whoever you're bringing onto the team, whether he or she is a co-founder or whether he and she is just somebody who's not a co-founder, but still would like equity to work. As to you have to have that conversation as to what percentage that is, what makes sense for them, and what makes sense for you based on the amount of value they would be adding to your company. And so that's just a negotiation you'd have to have. But I would say I am not comfortable working pro bono with anyone, even though people have offered that. I feel you should still, there has to be an exchange of value. And that exchange of value doesn't necessarily have to be equity, doesn't necessarily have to be cash. One of our advisors, for example, I said, she said, you know, I'll do it for free. I said, but, you know, why? And she said, you know, the data that you have will help me immensely in my research work. And anywhere else where I'd have to go to get that data, it would be extremely expensive. So I said, all right. I said, okay, then that makes sense. All right, we'll do it on those terms. So it wasn't free because I am giving her access to our data.
Right.
So I would say approach it that way.
That's really good advice. Thank you. So for pre-revenue, I've got like 2 and a bit months before I get any revenue. How would you keep somebody like that? You just, is it a promissory note or is it a set? Yeah. How do you work that out?
I feel I'm selling for Seed Legals. Go on to Seed Legals.
Seed Legals.
Get, you know, they'll sort it out for you. Get an advisory agreement in place. One of the ways of compensating in an advisory agreement is giving away equity, and you can vest that equity over time. It can also be via share options, and they'll sort it out for you. I you know,
thank you.
Highly recommend Seed Legals.
Thank you.
I'm just gonna quickly.
They're not paying me for this, by the way.
I'm just gonna quickly use that as an opportunity to talk about vesting for 30 seconds because it's not something we've covered and some people might not be familiar with this. It essentially allows you to give, people have to earn shares before you give them to it. So you can say, okay, if you were to compensate someone with 5% of your company, which is a large equity stake, they don't get those shares up front. They have to have been at the company for X amount of time in order to get that. And usually it's broken down by quarter. And so let's say they earn the 5% over the 2 years. Each quarter, they get a proportionate number of shares. And then after the 2 years, it will be up to the 5%. And then there's an additional term called a cliff, which will mean you have to be at the company for perhaps a full year. And then the 2 years starts after that period. There's different ways to formulate it, and there's no perfect or there's no standard template. However, it is standard for employees to have vesting schedules and also founders as well. So when you raise a new round, investors, if you own 50% of the company, let's say you have a co-founder, investors will essentially expect you to create a vesting schedule for yourself and for your co-founder. So your 50% essentially goes away and you will earn that 50% over staying at the company for X number of years. Again, there's different formats for that, but that's just a rough overview. Okay, we have time for one more question. I'll go through this question from Anne. She says, amazing story, congratulations, and thanks so much for sharing it. I'd like to know how you chose where to raise funds from and where to set up the company. Also, how did you solve the chicken and the egg issue of the marketplace? A big question to end on for our last and short time that we have left, but take it away.
Thank you for asking. I don't know whether I'll be able to answer all of that. So in terms of, where we went to for our investors, that was one of the questions.
How did you
like I mentioned, it was LinkedIn, emails, and then, people we knew who then knew people who we got in touch with. Reach out to your networks, from your universities to your schools to your friends if they're connected. There are lots of lists available online. Just do a Google search.
Can I just jump in? Were they all in the UK? And was SEIS part of the attraction, or were they kind of global?
For UK investors, yes, but we have people from all over the world. We have people from Canada, the US, UK, Germany, Pakistan, India, now Italy and Germany as well. So we have people from all over the world who've invested. For UK investors, yes, SEIS was a big attraction for them.
Thanks. Sorry, I'll let you go with the rest. I don't know whether she was asking about the geographical spread of the investors, which is why I jumped in.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I reached out to people who were relevant. What was the second part of the question?
The chicken and egg problem with the marketplace.
Oh, I mean, we're not a marketplace, so I wouldn't be able to answer that question. So, but read some from the little bit that I've read online, and that's, again, highly recommend. I mean, this program will really help you answering that question as well as the stuff available online. There is, I think you have to determine where the bigger problem is, and I think solve that first. I think with Uber, it was getting drivers on board. And once the drivers were on board, then the other side of getting users was easier. But again, I'm not a marketplace guy, so be very wary of the advice I give on this.
We have on Thursday, we have another founder come in who went through one of our previous cohorts and has an amazing traction as well. That's a marketplace business, so they can talk a bit more about how they tackled that problem.
Yeah.
All right, we are at time. Founder Stick Around, we have Inken, who's going to be speaking next on 10 questions to ask your investors. But first off, let's give a little nice Zoom round of applause for Faraan. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and have a safe trip to New York.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Bye. Thank you so much for having me.
Bye. I'm just going to stop recording and then click again once.